Chapter 6. On the merits of faith for gaining the goal and on the harmfulness of dry polemics. Hamachuda was astonished at the fantastic tale of his beloved. Being ignorant, he smiled derisively at the tale and asked that wise princess, "My dear, what you have been saying seems to be nothing but invention. Your words have no relation to facts and are altogether meaningless. You are certainly the daughter of an apsaras, celestial damsel, and brought up by a rishi Vyagraprada in the forest. You are still young and not yet fully grown, but you talk as if you were several generations old. Your long-winded speech is like that of a girl possessed and not in her senses. I cannot believe that rigmarole. Tell me, where your companion is, and who is the son she killed? Where are those cities? What is the significance of your story? Where is your friend? I know nothing of your lady-in-waiting. You may ask my mother if you like. There is no other lady besides your mother-in-law in my father's place. Tell me quickly where such a lady is to be found and where your son's sons are. I think your tale is a myth like the tale of a barren woman's son." A clown once related a story that a barren woman's son mounted a chariot reflected in a mirror and decorated with silver taken from the sheen of mother of pearl, armed himself with weapons made of human horn, fought in the battlefield of the sky, killed the future king, subdued the city of aerial host, and enjoyed himself with dream maidens on the banks of the waters of a mirage. I take your words to mean something similar that can never be the truth. After listening to the words of her lover, the wise girl continued, "Lord, how can you say that my parable is meaningless? Words from the lips of those like me can never be nonsense. Falsehood undermines the effects of one's penance. So how can it be suspected in virtuous people? How can such a one be stainless and numbered among the sages? Moreover, one who entertains an earnest seeker with hollow or false words will not prosper in this world nor advance in the next. Listen, Prince, a pure-blind man cannot have his eyesight restored by merely hearing the prescription read. He is a fool who misjudges good precepts for falsehood. Do you think, my dear, that I, your wife, would deceive you with the myth when you are so much in earnest? Reason well and carefully examine these suspected untruths of mine. Is not an intelligent man accustomed to judge big things in the world by verifying a few details in them? I now present to you my credentials. Some things used to please you before. Why did they cease to do so after you heard me on the last occasion? My words brought about dispassion. They are similarly bound to do so even more in the future. How else can it be? Judge your own statements from these facts. Listen to me, King, with an unsophisticated and clear intellect. Mistrust in a well-wisher's words is the surest way to ruin. Faith is like a fond mother who can never fail to save her trusting son from dangerous situations. There is no doubt about it. The fool who has no faith in his well-wisher's words is forsaken by prosperity, happiness, and fame. A man who is always suspicious can never gain anything worthwhile. Confidence holds the world and nourishes all. How can a babe thrive if it has no confidence in its mother? How can a lover gain pleasure if he does not trust his beloved? Similarly, how is the aged parent to be happy who has no confidence in his sons? Would the husbandman till the land if he had no confidence? Mutual distrust will put an end to all transactions. How can humanity exist without universal confidence? If you should say, on the other hand, that it is the law of cause and effect, I will tell you, listen to me. People believe in the law that such a cause produces such a result. Is that not faith? so that a man will not dare to breathe in the absence of shraddha, faith, for fear of pathogenic infection and consequently perish. Therefore believe before you aspire for supreme beatitude. If again, Prince, you hesitate to depend on an incompetent person, as you may think me to be, that is because you believe that a certain end must be accomplished. How else can the desired end be approached? Hearing his beloved's arguments, Hemachyuta said to the fair speaker, If faith should be placed in anyone, my dear, it should certainly be placed in those worthy of it, in order that one's ends may be served. He who is bent on the highest good should never trust an incompetent person, otherwise he comes to grief, like a fish, attracted by the tempting bait at the end of a fishing line. Therefore, faith can only be put in the worthy and not in the unworthy. Fishes and all those men who have ruined themselves in the one way and prospered in the other can verify my statement. I can only believe you, therefore, after full ascertainment of your worth, not otherwise. Why then do you ask me if the desired end can be approached? After hearing him, Hemaleka replied, Listen, Prince, to what I am going to say now. I answer your point. How is one to judge whether one is good or bad? Is it by reference to accepted standards? What is the authority behind such standards? Are the authors themselves worthy or unworthy? In this way there will be no end to the argument. Moreover, the observer's competence must be taken into account. Thus, too, there will be no finality reached. Therefore, life moves by faith alone. I shall explain to you the rationale of reaching the supreme goal by means of faith. Be attentive. People will not gain anything either during their lifetime or after death, by endless discussions or blind acceptance. Of the two, however, there is hope for the latter and there is none for the former. The following anecdote illustrates the point. Once there lived a saint by the name Kausika on the Saya hill near the banks of the Godavari. He was serene, pure, pious, having knowledge of the supreme truth. Several disciples attended on him. Once when the master had gone out, the disciples started to discuss philosophy according to their own lights. There appeared on the scene a Brahmin of great intellect and wide learning, Sunga by name, who successfully refuted all their arguments by his skill in logic. He was a man without faith and without conviction, but an able debater. When they said that the truth must be ascertained by reference to some standard, he argued on the basis of an unending series of standards and refuted them. He rounded off his speech with the following. Listen, you Brahmins, standards are not applicable for ascertaining merits or demerits, and so arriving at the truth. For erroneous standards are no good as tests. To start with, their correctness must be established. Other standards are required to check them. Are they, in their turn, infallible? Proceeding in this way, no finality can be reached. Therefore, no tests are possible. Ascertainment of truth being impossible without being tested, nothing can therefore be truth. This enunciation itself cannot be true, nor the enunciator either. What then is the decision arrived at? That all is nothing, void? This too cannot be supported by reliable facts. Hence the statement that all are void ends in void also. Hearing his disclosure, some of them were impressed by the force of Sunga's logic and became scholiasts of the void. They got lost in the maze of their philosophy. The discriminating ones among the hearers placed Sunga's arguments before their master and were enlightened by him. Thus they gained peace and happiness. Therefore, be aware of arid polemics parading as logic. Use it in the manner in which the holy books have done. That way lies salvation. Thus addressed by that eminently wise wife, Hemachyuta was greatly astonished and said, My dear, I did not realize your wisdom earlier. Blessed are you that you are so wise. Blessed am I that I have your company. You say that faith bestows the highest good. How does it do so? Where is faith expedient and where not? The scriptures differ in their teachings. The teachers differ among themselves. The commentaries similarly differ from one another. To add to this, one's reasoning is no guide. Which of them is to be followed and which rejected? Each one stamps his own views with the seal of authority and condemns the rest, not only as worthless, but also as harmful, my dear. That being the case, I cannot decide for myself. What you condemned as the school of the void turns round on others and attacks them. Why should not that school be respected? It has its own adherents and its own system of philosophy. Explain to me, dear, all these things clearly. They must indeed be already clear to you. Thus ends the chapter 6 on Shraddha, faith, in the Hemachyuta section in Tripura Rahasya. Chapter 7. That the goal is gained only after ascertaining God by faith, effort, approved logic, and devotion to Him. When Hemaleka was thus asked by her husband, she, with her saintly practical knowledge of the state of the universe, spoke to him with increased kindness. Dearest, listen to me attentively. What is known as the mind is, after all, always like a restless monkey. So the ordinary man is always afflicted with troubles. Everybody knows that a restless mind is the channel of endless troubles, whereas one is happy in sleep in the absence of such restlessness. Therefore keep your mind steady when you listen to what I say. Hearing with a distracted mind is as good as not hearing, for the words serve no useful purpose, resembling the fruit-laden tree seen in a painting. Man is quickly benefited if he turns away from dry, ruinous logic and engages in purposeful discussion. Appropriate effort must follow right discussion, for man profits according to the zeal accompanying his efforts. You find, my dear, that aimless discussions are fruitless and that earnest efforts are fruitful in the world. Discriminating zeal is what enables the husbandman to plow the fields in season and the assayer to assay the worth of gold, silver, precious stones, medicinal herbs, and the rest. No practical work will be done if people spend all their lives in vain discussions alone. Therefore one should discard aimless talk and begin immediately to accomplish the highest aim of life, as ascertained by appropriate sincere discussion. Nor should one refrain from individual effort, as is the wont of the followers of Sangha. A man who is in earnest need never be at loss. Will sustained effort ever fail in its purpose? Men earn their food, gods their nectar, pious ascetics the highest beatitude, and others their desires, by individual assertion alone. Think well and tell me where, when, how, and what profit was ever gained by any man who, without engaging in action, was taken up with dry polemics. If some stray cases of failure should make one lose faith in individual exertion, he is certainly accursed of God, because he is his own ruin. Guided by proper deliberation, accompanied by zeal, and engaged in individual efforts, one must make one's own unfailing way to emancipation. There are said to be many ways to that end. Choose that one among them which is the surest. Choice is made by right discussion and according to the experience of the wise. Then begin the practice immediately. I shall now explain it in detail. Attend. That is the best which does not again yoke you to suffering. To a discriminating man, pain is apparent in all aspects of life. Whatever has the impress of misery on it cannot be good. Such are wealth, children, wife, kingdom, treasury, army, fame, learning, intellect, body, beauty, and prosperity. for they are all transient and already in the jaws of death, otherwise called time. Can that be good which is only the seed ready to sprout as pain and grow into misery? The right means lies beyond these. However, the desire to possess them is born of delusion. The master wizard is Mahasvara. He being the creator of the universe, all are deluded by him. Even a juggler of limited powers is able to deceive his audience, although only to a limited degree. The magic cannot be seen through without reference to him. Of course, the whole audience will not be deluded by him, but who can escape the illusion of Mahadeva? Just as there are a few who know how to see through the illusory tricks of the juggler and are not mystified by him, so also men learn to overcome the universal Maya, illusion. If only the Lord is gracious to them, they can never escape from Maya without his grace. Therefore he should be worshipped by those who are anxious to cross the ocean of Maya. He with whom God is graciously pleased is endowed with Mahavidya, the supreme knowledge, by means of which his crossing of the ocean of Maya is certain. Other methods are also put forward as serving this supreme end, but they are bound to fail in their purpose if the Lord's grace be not forthcoming. Therefore worship the primal cause of the universe as the starting point. Be devoted to him. He will soon enable you to succeed in your attempts to destroy the illusion. Clearly, the universe must have some origin. Although the origin is shrouded in mystery, let us investigate the cause from the visible effect and be guided by the Holy Scriptures. And then the conclusion will be reached that there is a Creator in no way comparable to any known agents. Contentious statements to the contrary have been logically refuted by many authoritative scriptural texts. That system, which admits only sensory evidence, is merely an apology for philosophy and leads nowhere. Salvation is not its end, but damnation is its fruit. Dry logic also must be condemned. Another system declares that the universe is eternal, without beginning or end. It follows that the universe and its phenomena are self-existent. Thus, lifeless, insentient matter is its own agent and keeper, which is absurd, because action implies intelligence, and no example can be cited to the contrary. Scriptures also say that the primal cause is an intelligent principle, and we know that action always originates from an intelligent source alone. The world is thus traced to its creator, who differs entirely from any agent known to us. Judging from the magnitude of the creation, his power must be immeasurable in the same proportion as the unimaginable vastness of the creation. Such a one must also be able to protect and elevate his own creatures. Surrender therefore unreservedly unto him. I shall adduce an example as a proof of this. We find in everyday life that a chief, if pleased, even though his means are limited, always ensures the prospects of the man who is sincerely devoted to him. If the Lord of the world be pleased, will anything be withheld from the devotee? Tell me. He is the only solace of the devotees, whereas the chiefs are many in the world, and not necessarily kind. Maybe they are cruel and ungrateful also. Their patronage is also wavering and short-lived. The Supreme Lord has infinite mercy for his devotees, is most grateful, and has unlimited powers. Otherwise, would people continue to worship him from untold ages? Kingdoms not well ordered are known to disintegrate, but this universe continues as ever. Therefore this Lord of mercy is well established and also rightly famed. Surrender yourself directly and unhesitatingly to him. He will ordain the best for you, and you need not ask for it. Among the methods of approach to God, there are 1. Worship to overcome troubles, 2. Worship to gain wealth, etc. 3. Loving dedication of oneself. The last one is the best and surest in its results. In practical life, too, a chief entreated by a man in trouble duly affords him relief. The man is, however, not helped if he has not shown proper attention to the patron. So also, the service born of ambition bears indeterminate and limited fruits according to its intensity. Devoted service with no ulterior motive takes a long time to be recognized, yet it makes even the petty chief amiable. A human master may take long to recognize unselfish work, but God, the Lord of the universe, the dweller in our hearts, knows everything and soon bestows appropriate fruits. In the case of other kinds of devotees, God has to await the course of destiny, that being his own ordainment. Whereas for the selfless devotee, God, the Lord, and the sole refuge, is all in all and takes care of him without reference to the devotee's predestiny or his own ordained laws. He compensates the devotee quickly, and that is because he is supreme and self-contained without depending on anything else. Predestiny or divine will is powerless before him. Everyone knows how he set aside predestiny and divine laws in the case of his famous devotee, Markandeya. I will explain to you now the fitness of this. Listen, my dearest. Note, a rishi, Mrikandu by name, who was childless, pleased by Shiva by his penance. When Shiva appeared to him, he prayed that a son might be born to him. Shiva asked him if he wished to have a dull boy long-lived or a bright boy short-lived. Mrikandu preferred the latter, so Shiva said, "You will have a very brilliant son, but he will only live for 16 years. Accordingly, a son was born who was very good and dutiful, and most intelligent and pious and charming all who saw him. The parents were delighted with him, but grew sad as he grew up. He asked them the reason for their sadness, and they told him of Shiva's boon. He said, 'Never mind, I will see,' and took the penance. Shiva was pleased with his intense devotion and ordained that he should remain 16 years of age for all eternity." End of note. The current notion that one cannot escape one's destiny is applicable only to weak-minded and senseless wastrels. Yogis who practice control of breath conquer fate. Even fate cannot impose its fruits on yogis. Destiny seizes and holds only senseless people. Conforming to and following nature, destiny forms part of nature. Nature, again, is only the contrivance for enforcing God's will. His purpose is always sure and cannot be prevented. Its edge can, however, be blunted by devotion to him, and if it is not so blunted, the predisposing cause may therefore be considered a most powerful factor in a man's life. Therefore, eschew high vanity and take refuge in him. He will spontaneously take you to the highest state. This is the first rung in the ladder to the pedestal of bliss. Nothing else is worthwhile. Dattatreya continued, "O Parasurama," hearing this speech of his wife. Hemachyuta was delighted and continued to ask her questions. "Tell me, dear, who is this God, the Creator, the self-contained one, and the ordainer of the universe to whom I should consecrate myself?" "Some say he is Vishnu, others Shiva, Ganesha, the sun, Narasimha, or other similar avatars. Others say Buddha or Arhat. Still others Vasudeva, the life principle, the moon, fire, karma, nature, primordial nature, and whatnot. Each sect gives a different origin for the universe. Tell me which of them is true. I verily believe that there is nothing unknown to you because that famous and omniscient sage, Vyagrapada, has been gracious to you, and profound wisdom shines in you, though you are of the weaker sex. please tell me out of your love for me, O fair one, speaking words of eternal life." Thus requested, Himalika spoke with pleasure. "Lord, I shall tell you the final truth about God. Listen. God is the all-seer who generates, permeates, sustains, and destroys the universe. He is Shiva, he is Vishnu, he is Brahma, the sun, the moon, etc. He is the one whom the different sects call their own. He is not Shiva, nor Vishnu, nor Brahma, nor any other exclusively. I will tell you further. Heed me. To say, for instance, that the primal being is Shiva with 5 faces and 3 eyes, the Creator would in that case be like an ordinary potter making pots endowed with a body and brain. True, there is no art found in the world without a body and some intellect. In fact, the creative faculty in men belongs to something between the body and pure intelligence. Body being insentient cannot act of its own accord, nor can intellect do so without a tool. Therefore the mind operates apart from the gross body, in dreams. Being intelligent, it creates an environment suitable to its latent desires. This clearly indicates that the body is only a tool for a purpose and the agent is intelligence. Instruments are necessary for human agents because their capacities are limited and they are not self-contained. Whereas the Creator of the universe is perfect in himself and creates the whole universe without any external aid. This leads to the important conclusion that God has no body. Otherwise he would be reduced to a glorified human being, requiring innumerable accessories for work and influenced by seasons and environments, in no way different from a creature, and not the Lord. Moreover, pre-existence of accessories would squash his unique mastery and imply limits to his powers of creation. This is absurd, as being contrary to the original premises. Therefore he has no body, nor the other aids, yet he still creates the world. O Lord of life, fools are taken in by the notion of giving a body to the transcendental being. Still, if devotees worship and contemplate him with a body according to their own inclinations, he shows them grace, assuming such a body, for he is unique and fulfills the desires of his devotees. Nevertheless, the conclusion must be reached that he is pure intelligence and his consciousness is absolute and transcendental. Such is the consciousness, intelligence, and purity, absolute being, the one queen, the Parameswari, transcendental goddess, overwhelming the 3 states and hence called TRIPURA. Though she is the undivided whole, the universe manifests in all its variety in her, being reflected, as it were, in a self-luminous mirror. The reflection cannot be apart from the mirror, and is therefore one with it. Such being the case, there cannot be difference in degrees, e.g., Shiva or Vishnu being superior to each other. Bodies are mere conceptions in the lower order of beings, and they are not to the point in the case of God. Therefore be wise and worship the one pure, unblemished transcendence. If unable to comprehend this pure state, one should worship God in the concrete form which is most agreeable to him. In this way, too, one is sure to reach the goal, though gradually. Though one attempted it in millions of births, one would not advance except in one of these 2 ways. Thus ends the chapter on the nature of God in the section of Hemachyuta in Tripura Rahasya. Chapter 8. Key to the parable of Chapter 5. Having learnt from the mouth of his wise wife the true significance of Tripura, who is pure intelligence and God in truth, and also the technique of Tripura's worship from competent teachers as prompted by divine grace, Hemachyuta gained peace of mind and took to the worship with intense devotion. A few months passed in this manner. God's grace is the sine qua non of any kind of knowledge of God. The Supreme Mother's grace descended on him, and he became totally indifferent to pleasure because his mind was entirely absorbed in the practical investigation of the truth. Such a state is impossible for anyone without the grace of God, because the mind engaged in the practical search for truth is the surest means of emancipation. Parasurama, countless aids will not give emancipation if an earnest search for truth is not made. Once more Hemachyuta sought his wife alone, his mind absorbed in the quest for truth. She saw her husband coming to her apartment, so she went to meet him, welcomed him, and offered him her seat. She washed his feet and prostrated before him, as was due to one of his rank, and spoke melting words of sweet love. "Dearest, I see you again after such a long time. Are you in good health? Of course the body is sometimes liable to illness. Do tell me why you have been neglecting me all these days. Not a day passed before without your seeing me and conversing with me. How have you been passing your time? I could never have dreamt that you would be so indifferent to me. What makes you so? How do you spend your nights? You used to say that a moment without me was like an eternity to you, and that you could not bear it." Saying this, she embraced him fondly and appeared distressed. Though embraced lovingly by his dear wife, he was not moved in the least and said to her, "Dear, I can no longer be deceived by you. I am convinced of your strength and that nothing can affect your inherent happiness. You are a sage and unperturbed. You know this world and beyond. How could anything affect you like this? I am here to ask your advice. Now please listen. Explain to me that tale you once related to me as the story of your life. Who is your mother? Who is your friend? Who is your husband? Who are her sons? Tell me what relationship have all these people to me. I do not clearly understand it. I no longer think it is a lie. I am sure you told me a parable which is full of significance. Tell me everything in full, so that I may understand it clearly. I bow to you reverently. Kindly clear these doubts." Hemaleka, with the smiling and delighted face, heard her husband and thought within herself, "He is now pure in mind and blessed of God. He is evidently indifferent to the pleasures of life and is also strong in mind. This must be due to God's grace alone, and his former virtues are now bearing fruit. The time is now ripe for him to be enlightened, so I will enlighten him." She said, "Lord, God's grace is upon you, and you are blessed. Dispassion cannot arise otherwise. It is the criterion of God's grace that the mind should be wrapped in the quest for truth, after becoming detached from sensual pleasures. I shall now solve the puzzle of my life story. My mother is transcendence, pure consciousness. My friend is intellect, discerning faculty. Ignorance is Madame Dark, the undesirable friend of intellect. The caprices of ignorance are too well known to need elucidation. She can delude anyone, making a rope seem to be a serpent and striking terror in the onlooker. Her son is the greatest of illusions, the mind. His wife is thought or conception or imagination. Her sons are 5 in number, namely hearing, taste, sight, touch, and smell, whose mansions are the respective senses. What the mind was said to steal from them is enjoyment of sensual objects, which leaves an impress on the mind to develop later in the proclivities of the mind. Sharing stolen objects with his wife is the manifestation of proclivities in dreams. Dream is the daughter-in-law of delusion, i.e., ignorance. Madame Varax is desire. Her sons are anger and greed. Their city is the body. What was said to be my most potent talisman is realization of the self. Mind's friend, guarding the city, is the vital principle which keeps moving as the life breath. The different cities peopled by them are hells past in the eternal passage of the soul. The consummation of the discerning faculty is samadhi. My admission into my mother's chamber is final emancipation. Such is, in brief, the tale of my life. Yours is likewise. Think well and be absolved. Thus ends the chapter on the course of life in the section of Hemachyuta in Tripura Rahasya. Chapter 9. How Hemachyuta realized the self after analyzing his own mind and plunging within. When Hemachyuta understood the significance of his wife's parable, he was agreeably surprised. His voice choked with joy as he said to her, "My dear, you are indeed blessed and clever too. How shall I describe the profound wisdom of the story of your life, narrated to me in the form of a parable? Up to now I did not know your progress. It has all been made as clear to me as gooseberry resting on the palm of my hand. I now understand that the end of humanity is to realize our wonderful nature. Please now tell me further, who is this mother of yours? How is she without beginning? Who are we? What is our real nature?" Asked thus, Hemalika told her husband, "Lord, listen carefully to what I am going to say, for it is subtle. Investigate the nature of the self with intellect made transparently clear. It is not an object to be perceived, nor described. How shall I then tell you of it? You know of the mother only if you know the self. The self does not admit of specification, and therefore no teacher can teach it. However, realize the self within you, for it abides in unblemished intellect. It pervades all, beginning from the personal God to the amoeba, but it is not cognizable by the mind or senses. Being itself unillumined by external agencies, it illumines all, everywhere and always. It surpasses demonstration or discussion. How, where, when, or by whom has it been specifically described, even incompletely? What you ask me, dear, amounts to asking me to show your eyes to you. Even the best teachers cannot bring your eyes to your sight. Just as a teacher is of no use in this instance, so in the other. He can at best guide you towards it and nothing more. I shall also explain to you the means to realization. Listen attentively. As long as you are contaminated with notions of me or mine, e.g., my home, my body, my mind, my intellect, the self will not be found, for it lies beyond cognition and cannot be realized as myself. Retire into solitude. Analyze and see what those things are which are cognized as mine. Discard them all, and transcending them, look for the real self. For instance, you know me as your wife, and not as yourself. I am only related to you and not part of you, much less your very being. Analyze everything in this way, and discard it. What remains over, transcending all, beyond conception, appropriation, or relinquishment? Know that to be the self. That knowledge is final emancipation. After receiving these instructions from his wife, Hemachyuta rose hurriedly from his seat, mounted on his horse, and rode away from the city. He entered a royal pleasure garden beyond the outskirts of the town and went into an imposing crystal palace. He dismissed his attendants and ordered the keepers, "Let no one enter these rooms while I am in contemplation, be they ministers, elders, or even the king himself. They must wait until you obtain my permission." Then he went up to a fine chamber in the 9th story, which looked out in all directions. The room was well furnished, and he sat down on a soft cushion. He collected his mind and began to contemplate thus: "Truly, all these people are deluded. Not one of them knows even the fringe of the self, but all are active for the sake of their own selves. Some of them recite the scriptures, a few study them in their commentaries. Some are busy, accumulating wealth. Others are ruling the land. Some are fighting the enemy. Others are seeking the luxuries of life. When engaged in all this selfish activity, they never question what exactly the self may be. Now why is there this confusion? Oh, when the self is not known, all is in vain, and as if done in a dream. So I will now investigate this matter. My home, wealth, kingdom, treasure, women, cattle, none of these is me, and they are only mine. I certainly take the body for the self, but it is simply a tool of mine. I am indeed the king's son, with goodly limbs and a fair complexion. These people, too, are taken up by this same notion that their bodies are their egos." Reflecting thus, he considered the body. He could not identify the body as the self, and so began to transcend it. This body is mine, not me. It is built up of blood and bones, and is changing each moment. How can this be the changeless, continuous me? It looks like a chattel. It is apart from me as is a waking body from the dream, etc. I cannot be the body, nor can the vital force be the self. Mind and intellect are clearly my tools, so they cannot be I. I am surely something apart from all these, beginning from the body and ending with the intellect. Note: the intermediaries are 1. Senses, 2. The mind, including the thinking, reasoning, and coordinating faculties, 3. The vital force. I am always aware, but do not realize that pure state of awareness. The reason of this inability is not clear to me. Objects are cognized through the senses, not otherwise. Life is cognized by touch, and mind by intellect. By whom is the intellect made evident? I do not know. I now see I am always aware. Realization of that pure awareness is obstructed by other factors pertaining to the non-self, butting in. Now I shall not imagine them. They cannot appear without my mental imagery of them, and they cannot obstruct the glory of the self without appearing. Thinking thus, he forcibly arrested his thoughts. Instantaneously a blank superseded. He at the same time decided that it was the self, so became very happy, and once again he began to meditate. "I will do it again," he said, and plunged within. The restlessness of the mind being thus resolutely checked, he saw in an instant a blazing light with no circumference. Regaining human consciousness, he began to wonder how this could happen. There is no constancy in the experience. The self cannot be more than one. I will repeat and see, he said, and dived again. This time he fell into a long sleep and dreamt wonderful dreams. On waking up, he began to think furiously. How is it that I was overpowered by sleep and started to dream? The darkness and light which I saw before must also be in the nature of dreams. Dreams are mental imagery. So how shall I overcome them? I shall again repress my thoughts and see, he said, and plunged within. His mind was still for a time. He was sunk, as it were, in an ocean of bliss. Shortly after, he regained his original state, owing to the mind again beginning to function. He reflected, what is all this? Is it a dream or a hallucination of the mind? My experience is a fact, but it surpasses my imagination. Why is that bliss quite unique and unlike any that I have experienced before? The highest of my known experiences cannot compare with even an iota of the state of bliss I was in just now. It was like sleep so far as I was not externally aware, but there was a peculiar bliss at the same time. The reason is not clear to me, because there was nothing to impart pleasure to me. Although I attempt to know the self, I do not do so. I see the self differently now and again. What can it be? Is it darkness, light, or pleasure, etc.? Or is it possible that these are successive forms of the self? I do not understand it. Let me ask my recondite wife. Having thus resolved, the prince ordered the doorkeeper to ask Himaleka to come to him. Within an hour and a half, she was climbing the steps of the mansion like the queen of night moving across the sky. She discovered the prince, her consort, in perfect peace of mind, calm, collected, and of happy countenance. She quickly went to his side and sat by him. As she nestled close to him, he opened his eyes and found her sitting close to him. Directly he did so, she quickly and fondly embraced him and gently spoke sweet words of love. "Lord, what can I do for your highness?" "I hope you are well. Please tell me why you called me up to this place." Thus addressed, he spoke to his wife in his turn. "My dear, I have, as advised by you, retired to a solitary place, where I am engaged in investigating the self. Even so, I have diverse visions and experiences. Thinking that the constant self-awareness is dimmed by the uncalled-for interference of mental activities, I forcibly repress my thoughts and remain calm. Darkness superseded, light appeared, sleep supervened, and finally a unique bliss overpowered me for a little while. Is this the self or something different? Please analyze these experiences of mine and tell me, my dear, so that I may clearly understand them." After listening to him carefully, Himaleka, the knower of this world and beyond, spoke sweetly thus. "Listen to me, my dear, closely. What you have now done to restrain thoughts with the mind turned inward, vichara, is a good beginning, and praised by the worthy as the best way. Without it, no one has ever been successful anywhere. However, it does not produce self-realization, for the self remains realized at all times. If a product, it cannot be the self, for how can the self be got anew? So then the self is never gained. Gain is of something which is not already possessed. Is there any moment when the self is not the self? Neither is control of mind used to gain it. I shall give you some examples. Just as things unseen in darkness are found on its removal by means of a lamp, and are therefore said to be recovered from oblivion, just as a confused man forgets his purse, but remembers and locates it on keeping his mind unruffled and steady, yet still says that he has gained the lost purse, though the steadying of his mind did not produce it. So also, the control of your mind is not the cause of your self-realization. Though the self is always there, it is not recognized by you even with a controlled mind because you are not conversant with it. Just as a yokel, unacquainted with the system, cannot understand the dazzling lights of the royal audience chamber at night, and so ignores its magnificence at first sight, so it is that you miss the self. Attend, dear. Blank darkness was visible after you controlled your thoughts. In the short interval before its appearance and after the control of mind, there remains a state free from the effort to control and the perception of darkness. Always remember that state as the one of perfect and transcendental happiness. All are deceived in that state because their minds are accustomed to be turned outward. Though people may be learned, skillful, and keen, still they search and search, only to be thwarted, and they do not abide in that holy state. They grieve day and night, without knowing this state. Mere theoretical knowledge of sculpture can never make a man a sculptor. Though he be a pandit, well grounded in the theory and the discussion of the philosophy of the self, he cannot realize the self, because it is not realizable, but already realized. Realization is not attained by going far, but only by staying still, not by thought, but by cessation of thought. Efforts toward realization is like the attempt to stamp with one's foot on the shadow cast by one's head. Effort will always make it recede. Just as an infant tries to take hold of his own reflection being unaware of the mirror, so also common people are taken in by their mental reflections in the mirror of the pure, luminous self, and are not aware of the mirror because they have no acquaintance with the self. Although people understand space, they are not aware of it because they are taken up by the objects in space. They understand the universe in space but have no regard for space itself. Similarly, it is with them in regard to the self. My Lord, consider well. The world consists of knowledge and the objects known. Of these, the objects are non-self and perceived by senses. Knowledge is self-evident. There is no world in the absence of knowledge. Knowledge is the direct proof of the existence of objects which are therefore dependent on knowledge. Knowledge is dependent on the knower for its existence. The knower does not require any tests for knowing his own existence. The knower, therefore, is the only reality behind knowledge and objects. That which is self-evident, without the necessity to be proved, is alone real. Not so other things. He who denies knowledge has no ground to stand on, and so no discussion is possible. The subject of knowledge settled, the question arises regarding the existence of objects in the absence of their knowledge. Objects and their knowledge are only reflections in the eternal, self-luminous supreme consciousness which is the same as the knower and which alone is real. The doubt that the reflection should be of all objects simultaneously, without reference to time and place contrary to our experience, need not arise because time and space are themselves knowable concepts and are equally reflections. The specific nature of the reflections is the averse of the objects found in space. Therefore, Prince, realize with a still mind your own true nature, which is the one, pure, undivided consciousness, underlying the restless mind which is composed of the whole universe and all its diversity. If one is fixed in that fundamental basis of the universe, the self, one becomes the all-doer. I shall tell you how to inhere thus. I assure you, you will be that. Realize with a still mind the state between sleep and wakefulness, the interval between the recognition of one object after another, or the gap between two perceptions. Note, the commentator compares the rays of light proceeding from the sun before they impinge on materials. They are themselves invisible, but capable of illumining objects. This explains the third statement above. He also says that consciousness is like water flowing through a channel, and later assuming the shape of the beds watered. This is the real self, inhering in which one is no longer deluded. End of note. This is the real self, inhering in which one is no longer deluded. Unaware of this truth, people have become inheritors of sorrow. Note, the commentator adds that a sage realizing the world as the reflection of the mind treats it as such and is thus free of misery. Shape, taste, smell, touch, sound, sorrow, pleasure, the act of gaining or the object gained. None of these finds place in that transcendence which is the support of all there is, which is the being in all, but is bereft of everything, does not contain anything. That is the Supreme Lord, the Creator, the Supporter, and the Destroyer of the universe, and the Eternal Being. Now, let not your mind be outgoing. Turn it inward. Control it just a little and watch for the self, always remembering that the investigator is himself, the essence of being, and the self of self. Note, the commentary on this sloka says, this sloka contains what is not to be done, namely the mind should not be permitted to be outgoing. What is to be done? The mind is to be turned inwards. And what is to be engaged in watchfulness? Just a short control is enough. No long control is necessary for the purpose. The question arises, how to look? The investigator, investigation, and the object investigated are all one. The mind should be brought to the condition of a newborn baby. Then he feels as if he were separate from all gross materials, and only the feeling I am persists. When the mind is controlled a little, a state will be evident at the end of the effort, in which the self can be realized as pure being, underlying all phenomena, but undivided by them, similar to the baby sense. Be also free from the thought, I see. Remain still, like a blind man seeing. What transcends sight and no sight, that you are. Be quick, and be that. Note, here the commentary says, the self transcends also the feeling I see. Adherence to that sensation divorces one from the self. Therefore, let that feeling also vanish, for that state is absolutely unstained by will, sensation, or thought. Otherwise, there will be no perfection in spite of innumerable efforts. Again, the word sight includes the waking and dream states, and no sight signifies deep sleep. That which is threading through these three states and even surpasses the sense I am is what you are. This is the fourth state, turiya, which is the string on which all the diverse objects of the universe are strung, and the whole is a garland to Sri Ramana. Hemachyuta did accordingly, and having gained that state referred to by his wife, he remained peaceful a long time, unaware of anything beside the self. Note, the commentator says that he was in nirvikalpa samadhi. Thus ends the chapter on peace, in the section on Hemachyuta in TRIPURA RAHASYA. Chapter 10. On further instructions by his beloved. On further instructions by his beloved, he got samadhi in spite of his external activities and remained in the state of emancipation even while alive. Hemaleka noticed that her husband had attained supreme peace, and so did not disturb him. He awoke in an hour and a half, opened his eyes, and saw his wife nearby. Eager to fall into that state once more, he closed his eyes, and immediately Hemaleka took hold of his hands and asked him sweetly, "My lord, tell me what you have ascertained to be your gain on closing your eyes." or your loss on opening them, my dearest? I'd love to hear you. Do say what happens on the eyes being closed or left open." Being pressed for an answer, he looked as if he were drunk and replied reluctantly and languidly as follows: "My dear, I have found pure untainted happiness. I cannot find the least satisfaction in the activities of the world, as sorrow increases when they finish. Enough of them. They are tasteless to me, like a sucked orange, only indulged in by wastrels, or like cattle incessantly chewing their cud. What a pity that such people should be to this day unaware of the bliss of their own self, just as a man goes a-begging while ignorant of the treasure hidden under his floor. So did I run after sensual pleasures, unaware of the boundless ocean of bliss within me. Worldly pursuits are laden with misery, and pleasures are transient. Still I was so infatuated that I mistook them for enduring pleasures, was often grief-stricken, yet did not cease to pursue them over and over again. The pity of it! Men are fools, unable to discriminate pleasure from pain. They seek pleasures but gain sorrow. Enough of these activities which increase the relish for such pleasure. My dear, I beg you, with hands clasped, let me fall again into the peace of my blissful self. I pity you that, though knowing this state, you are not in it, but are ever engaged in vain." The wise girl gently smiled at all this, and said to him, "My lord, you do not yet know the highest state of sanctity, which is not besmirched by duality, reaching which the wise transcend duality and are never perplexed. That state is as far from you as the sky is from the earth. Your small measure of wisdom is as good as no wisdom, because it is not unconditional, but remains conditioned by closing or opening your eyes. Perfection cannot depend on activity or the reverse, on effort or no effort. How can that state be a perfect one if mental or physical activity can influence it? Or if the displacement of the eyelid by the width of 8 barley grains makes all the difference to it? Again, how can it be perfect if located only in the interior? What shall I say of the grandeur of your delusion? How ridiculous to think that your eyelid, 1 inch long, can shut up the expanse in which millions of worlds revolve in one corner alone. Listen, Prince, I will tell you further. As long as these knots are not cut asunder, so long will bliss not be found. The knowledge acquired is thus not effective. These knots are millions in number, and are created by the bond of delusion, which is no other than ignorance of the self. These knots give rise to mistaken ideas, the chief of which is the identification of the body with the self, which in its turn gives rise to the perennial stream of happiness and misery in the shape of the cycle of births and deaths. The second knot is the differentiation of the world from the self, whose being consciousness is the mirror in which the phenomena are simply reflected. Similarly with the other knots, including the differentiation of beings among themselves and from the universal self. They have originated from time immemorial, and recur with unbroken ignorance. The man is not finally redeemed until he has extricated himself from these numberless knots of ignorance. The state, which is the result of your closing the eyes, cannot be enough, for it is pure intelligence and eternal truth, transcending anything else, yet serving as the magnificent mirror to reflect the phenomena arising in itself. Prove, if you can, that everything is not contained in it. Whatever you admit as known to you is in the knowledge conveyed by that consciousness. Even what may be surmised to be in another place and at a different time is also within your consciousness. Moreover, what is not apparent and unknown to that intelligence is a figment of imagination, like the son of a barren woman. There cannot be anything that is not held by consciousness, just as there cannot be reflection without a reflecting surface. Therefore, I tell you that your conviction, I shall lose it by opening my eyes, or I know it, is the knot waiting to be cut. And there will be no attainment, though. Remember, it cannot be the perfect state if it can be attained. What you consider the happy state as accomplished by the movements of your eyelids cannot indeed be perfect, because it is certainly intermittent and not unconditional. Is any place found where the effulgence is not, my lord? Of the fire blazing at the dissolution of the universe? All will resolve into that fire, and no residue will be left. Similarly, also the fire realization will burn away all your sense of duty so that there will be nothing left for you to do. Be strong. Root out your thoughts, and cut off the deep-rooted knots from your heart, namely, I will see, I am not this, this is non-self, and such like. Find, wherever you turn, the one undivided eternal blissful self. Also watch the whole universe reflected as in a mirror in the self, as it arises and subsides into it. Stop contemplating. I see the self everywhere and in everything within and without. Reach the residual reality within and abide as the self, with your own natural state. At the end of her speech, Hemachuta's confusion was cleared up, so that he gradually became well established in the perfect self, bereft of any distinction of within and without. Being always equable, he led a very happy life with Hamaleka and others, reigned over his kingdom and made it prosperous, engaged his enemies in war and conquered them, studied the scriptures and taught them to others, filled his treasury, performed the sacrifices pertaining to royalty, and lived 20,000 years, emancipated while yet alive, Jivan Mukta. Note: scholars say that 1,000 is a peculiar expression for 4, thus 20,000 stands for 80. The king Muktachuda, having heard that his son Hemachuda had become a Jivan Mukta, consulted his other son Manichuda. Both agreed that Hemachuda was not as before, but that he had changed, so that he was no longer affected by the greatest of pleasures or the worst of sorrows, that he treated friend and foe alike, that he was indifferent to loss or gain, that he engaged in royal duties like an actor in a play, that he seemed like a man always intoxicated with wine, and that he did his duty well notwithstanding his absent-minded or otherworldly look. They pondered the matter and wondered. Then they sought him in private and asked him for the reason of his change. When they had heard him speak of his state, they too desired to be instructed by him, and finally became Jivan Muktas like Hemachuda. The ministers were in their turn desirous of attaining that state, and eventually reached it after receiving proper instructions from the king. So were the citizens, the artisans, and all classes of people in that city. All of them gained the summum bonum, highest good of life, and transcended desire, anger, lust, etc. Even the children and the very old people were no longer moved by passions. There were still worldly transactions in this ideal state, because the people consciously acted their parts as the actors in a drama in accord with the rest of creation. A mother would rock the cradle with lullabies expressive of the highest truth. A master and his servants dealt with one another in the light of that truth. Players entertained the audience with plays depicting truth. Singers sang only songs on truth. The court fools caricatured ignorance as ludicrous. The academy only taught lessons on God knowledge. The whole state was thus composed only of sages and philosophers, be they men or women, servant boys or servant maids, dramatic actors or fashionable folk, artisans or laborers, ministers or harlots. They nevertheless acted in their professions in harmony with creation. They never cared to recapitulate the past or speculate on the future with a view to gain pleasure or avoid pain, but acted for the time being, laughing, rejoicing, crying, or shouting, like drunkards, thus dissipating all their latent tendencies. The rishis, Sanaka, and others called it the renowned City of Wisdom when they visited it. Even parrots and cockatoos in their cages spoke words of wisdom. For example, consider the self as pure intelligence bereft of objective knowledge. What is known is not different from that intelligence. It is like a series of images reflected in a mirror. Absolute consciousness is the universe. It is I. It is all. Sentient and insentient, mobile and immobile. Everything else is illuminated by it, whereas it is alone self-luminous. Therefore let those sensible people who are desirous of chit, pure intelligence, turn away from illusory knowledge and contemplate their own self, the absolute consciousness, which illumines all the rest, and which is their being too. The town where even the lower animals convey such supreme wisdom is famous to this day as the City of Wisdom on earth, which reputation it owes to that one wise princess Hemaleka, by whose advice Hemachyuta became a Jivan Mukta, all the rest following in his wake. Dattatreya continued, "Thus you see, Parasurama, the primary cause of emancipation is association with the wise. Therefore, follow that advice first and foremost." Thus ends Chapter 10, on the section of Hemachyuta and Tripura Rahasya,